Chapters 80, 81, and 82 of Ruth Hall by Fanny FERN. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 80. Ruth returned from her daily walk to the post office one morning with a bundle of letters, among which was one from Mr. Walter. Its contents were as follows: "Dear Sister Ruth, I wonder if you are enjoying your triumph half as much as I. But how should you, since you do not know of it? Your publishers inform me that orders are pouring in for your book faster than they can supply them. What do you think of that? Floy, you have made a decided hit. How lucky that you had the foresight to hold on to your copyright. $800 will not be a circumstance to the little fortune you are going to make. Your success is glorious, but I don't believe you are half as proud of it as I am. And now I know of what you are thinking as well, as if I were by your side. 'Tis of the little exile, 'tis of Katie. You would fly directly to bring her home. Can I be of any service to you in doing this? Business takes me your way after to-morrow. Can you curb your impatience to see her till then? If so, I will accompany you. Please write me immediately. Yours truly, John Walter." Ruth tossed the batch of letters down unopened, and sprang to her feet. She tossed up Nettie. She kissed the astonished child till she was half strangled. She laughed, she cried, and then she sat down with her forehead in both her hands for a prolonged reverie. What good news about the book! How could she wait 2 days before she brought back Katie? And yet it would be a happy thing that Mr. Walter, whose name was synonymous with good tidings, should be associated with her in the return of the child. Yes, she would wait. And when Katie was secured, what then? Why, she would leave forever a city fraught with such painful associations. She would make her a new home. Home? Her heart leaped. Comforts for Nettie and Katie, clothes, food, earned by her own hands. Tears trickled through Ruth's fingers, and her heart went out in a murmured prayer to the God of the widow and fatherless. "May I play house with these?" said Nettie, touching Ruth's elbow and pointing to the unopened letters. "No, little puss," said Ruth, "not yet. Wait a bit till I have glanced at them," and she broke the seal of one. It was an offer of marriage from a widower. He had read an article of hers on stepmothers, and was very sure that a woman with such views could not fail to make a good mother for his children. He was 35, good looking, every man who had written her a love letter was, good disposition, warm hearted, would love her just as well as if he had never bent an adoring knee to Mrs. Dorrance number 1, was not at all set in his ways, in fact preferred she should in everything save him the trouble of choice, would live in any part of the Union she desired, provided she would only consent to the Union. These last two words Mr. Dorrance had italicized, as indicating, probably, that he considered it a pun fit even for the critical eye of the authoress. "Oh, pshaw!" cried Ruth, throwing the letter to Nettie. "Make anything you like of it, puss. It is no value to me." The next letter ran as follows: "Madam, I have the honor to be guardian to a young Southern lady, an orphan, of large fortune, who has just completed her education. She has taken a suite of apartments, and given me orders to furnish them without regard to expense, according to her fancy. I have directions to procure busts of Mrs. Hemans, Miss Landon, and several other distinguished female writers, among whom Miss Leroy includes Floy. I have not the pleasure, madam, of knowing your true name, with whose writings she has become familiar, and who is as great a favorite with her as she is with the multitude who have paid tribute to her genius. Please send me a line, my address below, allowing me to inform my ward how her favorite wish can best be carried out. Yours truly, Thomas Pierce." Ruth glanced around her little dark room and smiled. "I would rather, instead, that an artist would take a sketch of my room now," said she, "that little black stove where I have so often tried in vain to thaw my frozen fingers, that rickety old bed, the old deal table, with its yellow bowl of milk. that homemade carpet, those time-worn chairs, and then you, my little bright fairy, in the foreground," and she pushed back the soft glossy curls from Nettie's fair brow. "No, no," said Ruth, "better reserve the niche destined for Floy to some writer to whom ambition is not the hollow thing it is to me. Well, what have we here? Another letter." Ruth broke the seal of letter number 3, and read: "Dear Madam, I am a poor devil, and worse editor. Nevertheless, I have started a paper. If you will but allow me to put your name on it as assistant editress, I am sure it will go like a locomotive. If, in addition to this little favor, you could also advance me the sum of $100, it would be an immense relief to your admirer, John Staples. P.S. Be sure to direct to John K. Staples, as there is another John Staples in this place who is a great rascal. J. K. S." "Well," exclaimed Ruth, "I did not believe I should ever be astonished again, but then I had not heard from Mr. Staples. But here is another letter. Let us see what the contents of number 4 are." Letter number 4 ran as follows: "Dear Floy, I am a better son, a better brother, a better husband, and a better father than I was before I commenced reading your articles. May God bless you for the words you have spoken, though unintentionally, so directly to me. May you be rewarded by Him to whom the secrets of all hearts are known. Your grateful friend, M. J. D." "This will repay many a weary hour," said Ruth, as her tears fell upon the page. End of chapter 80. Chapter 81. The rain had poured down without mitigation for 7 consecutive days. The roads were in a very plastery state. Dissevered branches of trees lay scattered upon the ground. Tubs and hogsheads, which careful housewives had placed under dripping spouts, were full to overflowing. The soaked hides of the cattle looked sleek as their owners' pomatumed heads of a Sunday. The old hen stood poised on one leg at the barn door, till even her patience had given out. The farmers had mended all the old hoe and rake handles, read the almanac through and through, and worn all the newspapers and village topics threadbare, when the welcome sun at last broke through the clouds, and every little and big puddle in the road hastened joyfully to reflect his beams. The old Dr. Hall started down cellar for his 11 o'clock mug of cider. To his dismay he found his slippered pedestals immersed in water, which had risen above the last step of the cellar stairs. "A pretty piece of work this rain has made, Miss Hall," said the doctor, stamping his wet feet and blowing his nose, as he returned from a visit to the lower regions. "The water has overflowed the cellar, and got most up to those hams that you set such store by. You'd better tell Bridget to climb over the heads of those barrels, and get the hams out before they are clean spoiled." Before the last words had fairly left the doctor's mouth, the old lady's cap strings were seen flying towards the kitchen. "I shan't do it for anybody," exclaimed the new help, as she placed her red arms akimbo. "I'm not going to risk my neck going over those tittlish barrels in that dark cellar for all the hams that was ever cured." "You can carry a lamp with you," suggested the old lady. "I shan't do it, I tell you," said the vixen. "Help is skurse out here in the country, and I can get a new place before sundown if I like." "Katie!" screamed the old lady with a shrill voice. "Katie!" Katie started from her corner, and came out into the entry in obedience to the summons. "Come here, Katie. Bridget is as contrary as a mule, and won't go into the cellar to get those hams. I cannot go in after them, nor the doctor either, so you must go in and bring them out yourself. Climb up on those barrel heads, and then feel your way along to the further corner. Go right down the cellar stairs, now quick." "Oh, I cannot, I dare not," said Katie, trembling and shrinking back, as the old lady pushed her along toward the cellar door. "I'm so afraid," said the child, peeping down the cellar stairs with distended eyes. "Oh, don't make me go down in that dark place, grandma." "Dark! Pooh!" said the old lady. "What are you afraid of? Rats? There are not more than half a dozen in the whole cellar." "Can't Bridget go?" asked Katy. "Oh, I am so afraid." "Bridget won't, so there's an end of that, and I'm not going to lose a new girl I've just got for your obstinacy, so go right down this minute, rats or no rats." "Oh, I can't. If you kill me I can't," said Katy, with white lips, and clinging to the side of the cellar door. "But I say you shall," said the old lady, unclenching Katy's hands. "Don't you belong to me, I'd like to know? And can't I do with you as I like?" "No," said Ruth, receiving the fainting form of her frightened child. "No." "Doctor, doctor," said the old lady, trembling with rage, "are you master in this house or not?" "Yes, when you are out of it," growled the doctor. "What's to pay now?" "Why, matter enough. Here's Ruth," said the old lady, not noticing the doctor's taunt. "Ruth interfering between me and Katy. If you will order her out of the house I will be obliged to you. I've put up with enough of this meddling, and it is the last time she shall cross this threshold." "You never spoke a truer word," said Ruth, "and my child shall cross it for the last time with me." "Humph!" said the doctor, "and you know better than a beggar. The law says if the mother can't support her children, the grandparents shall do it." "The mother can, the mother will," said Ruth. "I have already earned enough for their support." "Well, if you have, which I doubt, I hope you earned it honestly," said the old lady. Ruth's heightened color was the only reply to this taunt. Tying her handkerchief over Katy's bare head, and wrapping the trembling child in a shawl she had provided, she bore her to a carriage where Mr. Walter and his brother-in-law, Mr. Gray, with little Nettie, awaited them. The door was quickly closed and the carriage whirled off. The two gentlemen alternately wiped their eyes, and looked out the window as Katy, trembling, crying, and laughing, clung first to her mother and then to little Nettie, casting anxious, frightened glances toward the prison she had left, as the carriage receded. Weeping seemed to be infectious. Ruth cried and laughed, and Mr. Gray and Mr. Walter seemed both to have lost the power of speech. Little Nettie was the first to break the spell by offering to lend Katy her bonnet. "We will do better than that," said Ruth, smiling through her tears. "We will get one for Katy when we stop. See here, Katy," and Ruth tossed a purse full of money into Katy's lap. "You know mother said she would come for you as soon as she earned the money." "Yes, and I knew you would, mother, but it was so very," and the child's lips began to quiver again. "She is so excited, poor thing," said Ruth, drawing her to her bosom. "Don't talk about it now, Katy. Lean your head on me and take a nice nap," and the weary child nestled up to her mother, while Nettie put one finger on her lip with a sagacious look at Mr. Walter, as much to say, "I will keep still if you will." "She does not resemble you as much as Nettie does," said Mr. Gray to Ruth in a whisper. "She is like her father," said Ruth. "The resemblance is quite startling when she is sleeping. The same breadth of forehead, the same straight nose and full lips. Yes, it has often been a great solace to me," said Ruth after a pause, "to sit at Katy's bedside, and aid memory by gazing at features which recalled so vividly the loved and lost." And she kissed the little nestler. "Nettie," said Mr. Walter, "is Ruth's second in face, form, and feature." "I wish the resemblance ended there," whispered Ruth, with a sigh. "Those rose-tinted dawns too often foreshadow the storm cloud." Chapter 82. An hour after the conversation narrated in the last chapter, the driver stopped at a fine-looking hotel. "This is the place, then, where you are going to stay for a few weeks, before you leave this part of the country for wherever," said Mr. Walter. "Allow me to speak for a dinner for us all. Such a day as this does not dawn on us often in this world," and he glanced affectionately at little Katy. The party was soon seated round a plentiful furnished table. Nettie stopped at every other mouthful to look into Katie's eyes, or to kiss her, while little Katie gazed about bewilderingly, and grasped her mother's hand tightly whenever her ear caught the sound of a strange voice or footstep. "Will you have some soup, little puss?" said Mr. Walter, after they were seated at the table, pulling one of Nettie's long curls. "Ask my mother," replied the child with a quizzical look. "She's the superintendent." Mr. Walter threw up his hands, and a general shout followed this precocious sally. "Come, come," said Mr. Walter, when he had done laughing, "you had begun too early, little puss. Come here and let me feel your head. I must take a phrenological look at you. Bless me, what an affectionate little creature you must be," said he, passing his hand over her head. "Stick a pin there now, while I examine the rest of your bumps." "You must not stick a pin in my head," said Nettie. "I don't like that way of expressing an opinion." "No further examination is necessary," said the extinguished Mr. Walter. "I have done with you, Miss Nettie." "What do you mean," whispered he to Ruth, "by having such a child as that? Are we going to have another genius in the family?" "I don't know about that," said Ruth, laughingly. "She often says such things when she gets excited and hilarious, but I never encourage it by notice, and you must not. My physician told me not to teach her anything, and by all means not to let her see the inside of a schoolroom at present." "Well, well," said Mr. Walter, "Miss Nettie and I must have a tilt at punning some day. You had better engage, Ruth, to furnish the Knickerbocker with smart repartees from his children's table from your own fireside." "Prenez garde," whispered Ruth. "Don't spoil her. Such a child needs careful training. She is high-spirited, warm-hearted, and sensitive," and Ruth sighed. "I interpret your thoughts," said Mr. Walter, "but we must have no backward glances to day. Those children will never suffer what you have suffered. Few women ever did. Ruth, for the thousandth time I tell you, you are a brave woman. Upon my word," said Mr. Walter suddenly, blushing and thrusting his hand in his pocket, "I have committed the sin so common to all mankind, carried letters for you round in my pocket all this time without delivering them. Here they are. I never saw a woman have so many letters as you do, Floy. You'll need a private secretary before long." Ruth broke the seal of one, saying, "You'll excuse me a few minutes," and read, "To Floy. Dear Madam, we have established a very successful infant school in our neighborhood, numbering about 50 pupils. Our first anniversary occurs next month. It is our intention to gather together the parents and children, and have a sort of jubilee. Hymns will be sung, and short pieces spoken. We should very much be obliged to you if you would write us a little dialogue, to be repeated by 2 little girls of the age of 6, something sweet and simple, such as you know how to write. We make no apology for thus intruding on your time, because we know your heart is with the children. Yours respectfully, John Dean, Secretary of the Left Bow Infant School." "Patience, gentlemen, while I read number 2," said Ruth. Number 2 ran as follows: "Dear Floy, old Guardy has sent me up to this academy. I hate academies. I hate Guardies. I hate everything but snipe shooting and boating. Just now I am in a horrid fix. Every fellow in this academy has to write a composition once a week. I cannot do it. I never could. My talents don't lie in that way. I don't know where they do lie. What I want of you is to write those compositions for me. You can do it just as easy as water runs down the hill. You could scratch one off while I am nibbing my pen. Old Phillips will think they are uncommon smart for me, but never mind, I shall keep dark, and you are such a good soul I know you can't refuse. My cigars have been out 2 whole days, so you may know that I have no funds, else I would send you a present. Yours truly, Hal Newell." After glancing over this letter, Ruth broke into a merry laugh, and saying, "This is too good to keep," read it aloud for the amusement of the company, who unanimously voted Hal Newell a composition every week for his precocious impudence. "Come now," said Mr. Walter, as Ruth took up number 3. "If you have another of the same sort let us hear it, unless it be of a confidential nature." Ruth looked over the letter a moment, and then read: "Dear Floy, Mamma has read me some of your stories. I like them very much. You say you love children. Don't you think we've got a brand new baby? It came last night when I was asleep in my trundle bed. It is a little pink baby. Mamma says it will grow white by and by. It has got such funny little fingers. They look all wrinkled, just like our maid's when she's been at the wash tub. Mother has to stay in bed with him to keep him warm. He's such a little cold shaky thing. He hasn't a bit of hair, and he scowls like everything, but I guess he'll be pretty by and by. Anyhow, I love him. I asked mother if I might not write and tell you about him, and she laughed and said, 'I don't know who Floy is, nor where she lives.' But Uncle Jack, he gives me lots of candy and dolls, said that I must send it to Floy's publishers. I don't know what a publisher is, and so I told Uncle Jack, and he laughed and said he would lose his guess if I didn't have something to do with them one of these days. I don't know what that meant either, and when I asked him, he said, 'Go away, Puss.' I think it is very nice to have an Uncle Jack at Christmas and New Year's, but other times they only plague little children. I wish I could see you. How do you look? I guess you look like Mamma. Mamma has got blue eyes and soft brown hair, and her mouth looks very pleasant when she smiles. Mamma's voice is as sweet as a robin's. So Papa says. Papa is a great big man, so big that nobody could ever hurt me or Mamma. Papa wants to see you too. Won't you write me a little letter all to myself? I've got a box made of rosewood, with a lock and key on it, where I'd hide it from Uncle Jack. That would tease him. Uncle Jack wants to see you too, but I hope you will never let him, for he's such a terrible tease, he'd plague you dreadfully. I guess our baby would send his love to you if he only knew you. Please write me soon, and send it to Kitty Mills, care of Uncle Jack Mills, and please seal it up all tight so he cannot peep into it. P.S. I want you to write a book of stories for little girls, and don't make them end bad because it makes me cry. Nor put any ghosts in them because that scares me, or have any moral down at the bottom, because Uncle Jack always asks if I skipped it. Write something funny, won't you? I like funny things and fairy stories. Oh, I like fairy stories so much. Wasn't it nice about the mice and the pumpkin and Cinderella? Make them all end well, won't you? Your affectionate little Kitty. I suppose you do not feel any curiosity to know what the papers say about your book, said Mr. Walter, as Ruth refolded her letters. I have quite a stock of notices in my pocket which I have saved up. You seem to have taken the public heart by storm. You could not desire better notices, and the best of it is they are spontaneous, neither begged nor in a measure demanded by a personal call upon the editors. What on earth do you mean? Asked Ruth. Look at the spirit of '76 flashing from her eyes, said Mr. Gray, laughing, as he pointed at Ruth. I mean this, said Mr. Walter, that not long since I expressed my surprise to an able critic and reviewer that he could praise a certain book, which he must have known was entirely deficient in merit of any kind. His answer was, the authoress of that book made a call on me at my office, deprecated in the strongest terms any criticism in the paper with which I am connected, said that other papers would take their tone from mine, that it was her first book, and that her pen was her only means of support, etc., etc. What can a man do under such circumstances? Said my informant. How could she? Said Ruth. Of what ultimate advantage could it be? It might have procured the sale of a few copies at first, but a book, like water, will find its level. But what astonishes me most of all is, that any able reviewer should be willing to risk his reputation as a critic by such promiscuous puffery. How are the people to know when he speaks his real sentiments? It strikes me," said Ruth, laughing, "that such a critic should have some cabalistic mark by which the initiated may understand when he speaks truthfully. It is such a pity," continued Ruth, thoughtfully, "it is so neutralized criticism. It is such a pity, too, that an authoress could be found so devoid of self-respect as to do such a thing. It is such an injury to those women who would disdain so to fetter criticism, who would launch their book like a gallant ship, prepare for adverse gales, not sneaking near the shore, or lowering their flag for fear of a stray shot." "Do you know, Ruth," said Mr. Walter, "when I hear you talk, I no longer wonder at Hyacinth's lack of independence and common sense. His share must, by some unaccountable mistake, have been given to you in addition to your own. But where are the children?" They looked around. Katie and Nettie, taking advantage of this prolonged discussion, had slid from the table, in company with a plate of nuts and raisins, and were holding an animated conversation in a further corner. "Why, what a great big mark on your arm, Katie!" exclaimed Nettie. "How did it come?" "Hush," replied Katie. "Grandma did it. She talked very badly about mamma to grandpa, and I started to go up into my little room, because you know I couldn't bear to hear it, and she called to me and said, 'Katie, what are you leaving the room for?' And you know, Nettie, mamma teaches us always to tell the truth. So I said, 'Because I cannot bear to stay and hear you say what is not true about my mamma.' And then grandma threw down her knitting and seized me by the arm and set me down, oh, so hard, on a chair, and said, 'But you shall hear it.' Then, oh, Nettie, I could not hear it, so I put my fingers in both ears, and then she beat me, and left that place on my arm, and held both my hands while she made me listen." During this recital, Nettie's eyes glowed like living coals. When Katie concluded, she clenched her little fists, and said, "Katie, why didn't you strike her?" Katie shook her head, and said in a low tone, "Oh, Nettie, she would have killed me. When she got angry, she looked just like that picture of Satan we went and saw in the shop window." "Katie, I must do something to her," said Nettie, closing her teeth together, and planting her tiny foot firmly upon the floor. "She shan't talk so about mamma. If I was only a big woman." "I suppose we must forgive her," said Katie, thoughtfully. "I won't," said the impulsive little Nettie. "Never, never, never." "Then you cannot say your prayers," said the wise little Katie. "Forgive us, as we forgive those who have trespassed against us." "What a pity!" exclaimed the orthodox Nettie. "Don't you wish that hadn't been put in? What shall we do, Katie?" "Nettie," said her mother, who had approached unnoticed, "what did you mean when you said just now that you wished you were a big woman?" Nettie hung her head for a minute, and twisted the corner of her apron irresolutely. At last she replied, with a sudden effort, "You won't love me, mamma, but I'll tell you. I wanted to cut grandma's head off." Little Katie laughed outright as the idea of this Lilliputian combatant presented itself. Ruth looked serious. "That is not right, Nettie," said she. "Your grandmother is an unhappy, miserable old woman. She has punished herself worse than anybody could punish her. She is more miserable than ever now, because I have earned money to support you and Katie. She might have made us all love her, and helped to make her old age cheerful. But now, unless she repents, she will live miserably and die forsaken, for nobody can love her with such a temper. That is a dreadful old age, Nettie." "I think I'll forgive her," said Nettie, jumping into her mother's lap, "but I hope I shan't ever hear her say anything against you, mother. I'm glad I wasn't Katie. Didn't you ever wish, Katie, that she might fall downstairs and break her neck or catch a fever or something?" "Oh, mother, what a funny girl Nettie is," said Katie, laughing till the tears came. "I had almost forgotten her queer ways. Oh, how grandmother would have boxed your ears, Nettie." The incorrigible Nettie cut one of her pirouettes across the room, and snapped her fingers by way of answer to this assertion. While Ruth and her children were conversing, the two gentlemen were quite as absorbed in another corner of the apartment. "It astonishes me," said Mr. Gray to Mr. Walter, "that Floy should be so elated by her wonderful success." "It will cease to do so when you know her better," said Mr. Walter. "The map of life has been spread out before her. She has stood singing on its breezy heights. She has lain weeping in its gloomy valleys. Flowers have strewn her pathway, and thorns have pierced her tender feet. The clusters of the promised land have moistened her laughing lip. The Dead Sea apple has mocked her wasted fingers. Rainbows have spanned her sky like a glory, and storms have beat pitilessly on her defenseless head. Eyes have beamed upon her smiling welcome. When wounded and smitten, she fainted by the way. The priest and the Levite have passed by on the other side. Floy knows every human phase of the human heart. She knows that she was none the less worthy because poor and unrecognized. She knows how much of the homage now paid her is due to the showy setting of the gem. Therefore she takes all these things at their true valuation. Then, my friend," and Mr. Walter's voice became tremulous, "amid all these well done plaudits, the loved voice is silent. The laurel crown indeed is won, but the feet at which she fain would cast it have finished their toilsome earth march. It is time we gentlemen were going. Let us talk business now," said Mr. Walter, as Ruth returned from her conversation with the children. "How long do you propose remaining here, Ruth?" "For a month or so," she replied. "I have several matters I wish to arrange before bidding adieu to this part of the country. I shall try to get through as soon as possible, for I long to be settled in a permanent and comfortable home." "I shall return this way in a month or 6 weeks," said Mr. Walter, "and if you are ready at that time, I shall be most happy to escort you and your children to your new residence." "Thank you," said Ruth. "Good bye, good bye," shouted both the children, as the two gentlemen left the room. End of chapter 82. Chapters 83, 84, and 85 of Ruth Hall by Fanny FERN. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 83. "I don't know about holding you both in my lap at once," said Ruth, smiling, as Nettie climbed up after Katie. "Please do," said Nettie. "And now let us have a nice talk. Tell us where we are going to live, mamma, and if we can have a kitty or a rabbit, or some live thing to play with, and if we're going to go to school, and if you're going to leave off riding now, and play with Katie and me, and go to walk with us, and ride with us. Shan't we have some rides? What is the matter, mamma?" said the little chatterbox, noticing a tear in her mother's eye. "I was thinking, dear, how happy we are." "Isn't that funny," said Nettie to Katie, "that mamma should cry when she is happy? I never heard of such a thing. I don't cry when I'm happy. Didn't we have a good dinner, Katie? Oh, I like this house. It was such an old dark room we used to live in, and there was nothing pretty to look at, and mamma kept on writing, and I had nothing to play with, except a little mouse who used to peep out of his hole when it came dark for some supper. I liked him, he was so cunning, but I couldn't give him any supper because—" Here the little chatterbox glanced at her mother, and then placing her mouth to Katie's ear, whispered, with a look of gravity which was irresistible, "because mamma couldn't support a mouse." Ruth laughed heartily as she overheard the remark, and Nettie thought her mother more of a puzzle than ever, that she should keep laughing and crying so in the wrong place. "What have you there, Nettie?" asked Katie. "Something," said Nettie, looking very wise as she hid her chubby hands under her pinafore. "It is a secret. Mamma and I know," said she, with a very important air. "Don't we, mamma? Would you tell Katie, mother, if you were me?" "Certainly," said Ruth. "You know it would not be pleasant to keep such a great secret from Katie." Nettie looked very searchingly into her mother's eyes, but she saw nothing there but sincerity. "Won't you ever tell, Katie, ever? It is a terrible secret." "No," replied Katie, laughing. "Not even to Mr. Walter?" asked Nettie, who had learned to consider Mr. Walter as their best friend, and the impersonation of all that was manly and chivalrous. Katie shook her head negatively. "Well, then," said Nettie, hanging her head with a pretty shame, "I'm in love." Katie burst into an uncontrollable fit of laughter, rocking herself to and fro, and ejaculating, "Oh, mamma! Oh, did you ever? Oh, how funny!" "Funny!" said Nettie, with the greatest naivety. "It wasn't funny at all. It was very nice. I'll tell you all how it happened, Katie. You see, I used to get so tired when you were away, when I had nobody to play with, and mamma kept up such a thinking. So mamma said I might go to a little free school opposite half a day, when I felt like it, and perhaps that would amuse me. Mamma told the teacher not to trouble herself about teaching me much. Well, I sat on a little low bench, and right opposite me, across the room, was such a pretty little boy. His name was Neddy. He had on a blue jacket with 12 bright buttons on it, I counted them, and little plaid pants and drab gaiters, and his cheeks were so rosy, and his hair so curly, and his eyes so bright. Oh, Katie!" And Nettie clasped her little hands together in a paroxysm of admiration. "Well, Katie, he kept smiling at me, and in recess he used to give me half his apple, and once when nobody was looking. Would you tell her, mamma?" said Nettie doubtfully, as she ran up to her mother. "Won't you tell now, Katie? Certainly," asked again Nettie. "No," promised Katie. "Not even to Mr. Walter?" "No." "Well, once when the teacher wasn't looking, Katie, he took a piece of chalk and wrote 'Nettie' on the palm of his hand, and held it up to me and then kissed it." And Nettie hid her glowing face on Katie's neck, whispering, "Wasn't it beautiful, Katie?" "Yes," replied Katie, trying to keep from laughing. "Well," said Nettie, "I felt most ashamed to tell mamma. I don't know why, though. I believe I was afraid she would call it silly or something, and I felt just as if I should cry if she did. But Katie, she did not think it as silly a bit. She said it was beautiful to be loved, and that it made everything on earth look brighter, and that she was glad little Nettie loved me, and that I might love him just as much as ever I liked, just the same as if he were a little girl. Wasn't that nice?" asked Nettie. "I always mean to tell mamma everything. Don't you, Katie?" "But you have not told Katie yet what you have hidden under your apron there," said Ruth. "Sure enough," said Nettie, producing a little picture. "Well, Nettie whispered to me one day in recess that he had drawn a pretty picture on purpose for me, and that he was going to have a lottery. I don't know what a lottery is, but he cut a great many slips of paper, some long and some short, and the one who got the longest was to have the picture. Then he put a little tiny mark on the end of the longest, so that I should know it, and then I got the picture, you know." "Why did he take all that trouble?" asked the practical Katie. "Why didn't he give it to you outright if he wanted to?" "Because," said Nettie, twirling her thumbs and blushing with a little feminine shame at her boy lover's want of independence. "He said he was afraid the boys would laugh at him if they found out." "Well, then, I wouldn't have taken it if I had been you," said the phlegmatic Katie. "But you know I loved him so," said Nettie, naively. End of chapter 83. Chapter 84. Days and weeks flew by. Katie and Nettie were never weary of comparing notes and relating experiences. Nettie thought gloomy attics, scant fare, and cross landladies the climax of misery, and Katie considered a score of milestones, with Nettie and a loving mother at one end, and herself and a cross grandmother at the other, infinitely worse. "Why, you can't tell anything about it," said Katie. Grandma took away a little kitty because I loved it, and burned up a story book mamma brought me, and tore up a letter which mamma printed in big capital letters on a piece of paper for me to read when I was lonesome. And she wouldn't let me feed the little snowbirds when they came shivering round the door, and she made me eat turnips when they made me sick, and she said I must not run when I went to school for fear it would wear my shoes out, and she put me to bed so early, and I used to lie and count the stars. I liked the seven little stars all cuddled up together best. And sometimes I looked at the moon and thought I saw faces and mountains in it, and I wondered if it was shining into mamma's window. And then I thought of you all snug in mamma's bed, and then I cried and got up and looked out into the road, and wondered if I could not run away in the night when grandmother was asleep. Oh, Nettie, she was a dreadful grandmother. She tried to make me stop loving mother. She told me that she loved you better than she did me, and then I wanted to die. I thought of it every night. I knew it was not true, but it kept troubling me. And then she said that very likely mamma would go off somewhere without letting me know anything about it, and never see me again. And she always said such things just as I was going to bed, and then I could not get to sleep till almost morning, and when I did, I dreamed such dreadful dreams. "You poor little thing!" exclaimed Nettie, with patronizing sympathy to her elder sister, and laying her cheek against hers. "You poor little thing! Well, mamma and I had a horrid time too, you can't imagine. The wind blew into the cracks of the room so cold, and the stove smoked, and I was afraid to eat when we had any supper, for fear mamma would not have enough. She always said, 'I am not hungry, dear,' but I think she did it to make me eat more. And one night mamma had no money to buy candles, and she wrote by moonlight, and I often heard her cry when she thought I was asleep. And I was so afraid of mamma's landladies. They screamed so loud and scowled at me so, and the grocer's boy made faces at me when I went in for a loaf of bread, and said, 'Oh, ain't we a fine lady, ain't we?' And the wheel was off my old tin cart, and oh dear, Katie!" And Nettie's little voice grew fainter and fainter, and the little chatterbox and her listener both fell asleep. Ruth, as she listened in the shadow of the further corner, thanked God that they who had so brief an acquaintance with life's joys, so early an introduction to life's cares, were again blithe, free, and joyous, as childhood ever should be. How sweet to have it in her power to hedge them in with comforts, to surround them with pleasures, to make up to them for every tear of sorrow they had shed, to repay them for the mute glance of sympathy, the silent caress given, they scarce knew why, but oh, how touching, how priceless, when her own heart was breaking. And there they lay in their pretty little bed, sleeping cheek to cheek with arms thrown around each other. Nettie, courageous, impulsive, independent, irrepressible, but loving, generous, sensitive, and noble-hearted. Katie, with veins through which the life-blood flowed more evenly, thoughtful, discriminating, diffident, reserved, so proud of those magnetic qualities in her little sister in which she was lacking, as to do injustice to her own solid but less showy traits, needing ever the kind word of encouragement and judicious praise to stimulate into life the dormant seeds of self-reliance. Ruth kissed them both, and left their future with him who doeth all things well. 12 o'clock at night! Ruth lies dreaming by the side of her children. She dreams that she roves with them through lovely gardens, odorous with sweets. She plucks for their parched lips the luscious fruits. She garlands them with flowers, and smiles in her sleep, as their beaming eyes sparkle, and the rosy flush of happiness mantles their cheeks. But look! There are 3 of them. Another has joined the band, a little shadowy form, with lambent eyes and the smile of a seraph. Blessed little trio! Follows another. He has the same shadowy outline, the same sweet, holy, yet familiar eyes. Ruth's face grows radiant. The broken links are gathered up. The family circle is complete. With the sudden revulsion of dreamland, the scene changes. She dreams that the cry of "Fire! Fire!" resounds through the streets. Bells ring, dogs howl, watchmen spring their rattles, boys shout, men whoop and hallow, as they drag the engine over the stony pavements. Fire! Fire! Through the street after street. She dreams the watchword flies. Windows are thrown up, and many a nightcap head is thrust hastily out, and as hastily withdrawn, when satisfied of the distant danger. Still on rush the crowd, the heavens are one broad glare, and still the wreathed smoke curls over the distant houses. From the doors and windows and the doomed buildings, the forked flame, fanned by the fury of the wind, darts out its thousand fiery tongues. Women with dishevelled locks and snow-white vestments rush frantically out, bearing in their tightened clasp the sick, maimed, and helpless, while the noble firemen, heedless of risk and danger, plunge fearlessly into the heated air of the burning building. Now Ruth moves uneasily on her pillow. She becomes conscious of a stifling, choking sensation. She slowly opens her eyes. God in heaven, it is not all a dream! With a wild shriek she springs from the bed, and snatching from it her bewildered children, flies to the stairway. It has fallen in! She rushes to the window, her long hair floating out on the breeze night. A smothered groan from the crowd below. They are lost! The showering cinders and falling rafters has shut out the dreadful tableau. No, the smoke clears away. That portion of the building still remains, and Ruth and her children are clinging to it with the energy of despair. Who shall save them? For it were death to mount that tottering wall. Men hold their breath, and women shriek in terror. See, a ladder is raised. A gallant fireman scales it. Katie and Nettie are dropped into the outstretched arms of the crowd below. The strong, brave arm of Johnny Galt is thrown around Ruth, and in an instant she lies fainting in the arms of a bystander. The butchering, ambitious conqueror impudently issues his bulletins of killed and wounded, quenching the sunlight in many a happy home. The world shouts bravo, bravo. Telegraph wires and printing presses are put in requisition to do him honor. Men unharness the steeds from his triumphal car, and draw him in triumph through the flower-garlanded streets. Women, gentle women, tosses the slaughtering hero wreaths and chaplets, but who turn twice to look at brave Johnny Galt, as, with pallid face and smoky, discolored garments, he crawled to his obscure home, and stretched his weary limbs on his miserable couch. And yet the clinging grasp of rescued helplessness was still warm about his neck. The thrilling cry, "Save us!" yet rang in the ears of the heedless crowd. God bless our gallant, noble, but unhonored firemen. End of chapter 84. Chapter 85. "Strange we did not hear from John," said Mrs. Millet to her wooden husband, as he sat leisurely sipping his last cup of tea, and chewing the end of his reflections. "I want to hear how he gets on, whether he is likely to get any practice, and if his office is located to suit him. I hope Hyacinth will speak a good word for him. It is very hard for a young man in a strange place to get employment. I really pity John. It must be so disagreeable to put up with the initiatory humiliations of a young physician without fortune in a great city." "Can't he go round and ask people to give him work, just like Cousin Ruth?" asked a sharp little Millet who was playing marbles in the corner. "It is time you were in bed, Willie," said his disconcerted mother, as she pointed to the door. "Go tell Nancy to put you to bed. As I was saying, Mr. Millet, it is very hard for poor John, he is so sensitive. I hope he has a nice boarding house among refined people, and a pleasant room with everything comfortable and convenient about it. He is so fastidious, so easily disgusted with disagreeable surroundings. I hope he will not get low-spirited. If he gets practice, I hope he will not have to walk to see his patients. He ought to have a nice chaise and a fine horse, and some trusty little boy to sit in the chaise and hold the reins while he makes his calls. I hope he has curtains to his sleeping room windows, and a nice carpet on the floor, and plenty of bedclothes, and gaslight to read by, and a soft lounge to throw himself on when he is weary. Poor John, I wonder why we do not hear from him. Suppose you write to-day, Mr. Millet." Mr. Millet wiped his mouth on his napkin, stroked his chin, pushed back his cup 2 degrees, crossed his knife and fork traversely over his plate, moved back his chair 2 feet and a half, hemmed 6 consecutive times, and was then safely delivered of the following remark: "My overcoat." The overcoat was brought in from its peg in the entry, the left pocket was disemboweled, and from it was ferreted out a letter from John, warranted to keep, which had lain there unopened 3 days. Mrs. Millet made no remark. That day had gone by. She had ate, drank, and slept with that petrifaction too long to be guilty of any such nonsense. She sat down with a resignation worthy of Socrates, and perused the following epistle: "Dear Mother, well, my sign hangs out my office door, Dr. John Millet, and here I sit day after day waiting for patience. I should spell it patience. This is a great city, and there are plenty of accidents happening every hour in the 24, but unluckily for me there are more than plenty of doctors to attend to them, as every other door has one of their signs swinging out. Hyacinth has been sick, and I ran up there the other day, thinking, as he is a public man, it might be some professional advantage to me to have my name mentioned in connection with his sickness. He has a splendid place, 6 or 8 servants, and everything on a corresponding scale. To think of Ruth's astonishing success! I was in hopes it might help me a little in the way of business, to say that she was my cousin, but she has cut me dead. How could I tell she was going to be so famous, when I requested her not to allow her children to call me Cousin John in the street? I tell you, Mother, we all missed a figure in turning the cold shoulder to her, and how much money she has made! I might sit in my office for a month, and not earn so much as she can by her pen in one forenoon. Yes, there's no denying it. We've all made a great mistake. Brother Tom writes me from college that at a party the other night he happened to mention, incidentally of course, that Floy was his cousin, when some one near him remarked, "I should think the less said about that by Floy's relatives the better." It frets Hyacinth to a frenzy to have her poverty alluded to. He told me that he had taken the most incredible pains to conciliate editors whom he despised, merely to prevent any allusion to it in their columns. I myself have sent several anonymous paragraphs to the papers for insertion, contradicting the current reports, and saying that Floy lost her self-respect before she lost her friends. I don't suppose that was quite right, but I must have an eye to my practice, you know, and it might injure me if the truth were known. I find it very difficult, too, to get any adverse paragraph in. She is getting to be such a favorite. Anywhere it will tell. The little scurrilous papers, you know, have no influence. It is very expensive living here. I am quite out of pocket. If you can get anything from father, I wish you would. Hyacinth says I must marry a rich wife as he did, when I get cornered by duns. Perhaps I may, but your rich girls are invariably homely, and I have an eye for beauty. Still, there's no knowing what gilded pill I may be tempted to swallow if I don't get into practice pretty soon. Hyacinth's wife makes too many allusions to her family to suit me, or Hyacinth either, if the truth must be told, but he hates a dun worse, so that squares it, I suppose. Love to Leila, your affectionate son, John Millet. End of chapter 85. Chapters 86, 87, and 88 of Ruth Hall by Fanny FERN. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 86. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Hall," said one of the old lady's neighbors. "Here is the book you lent me. I am much obliged to you for it. I like it better than any book I have read for a long while. You said truly that if I once began it I should not lay it down till I had finished it." "Yes," said the old lady, "I don't often read a book nowadays. My eyes are not very strong. Blue eyes seldom are, I believe," said she, fearing lest her visitor should suspect old time had been blurring them. "But that book now just suits me. There is common sense in it. Whoever wrote that book is a good writer. I hope she will give us another just like it. Floy is a queer name. I don't recollect ever hearing it before. I wonder who she is." "So do I," said the visitor, "and what is more, I mean to find out. Oh, here comes Squire Dana's son. He knows everything. I'll ask him. Yes, there he comes into the gate. Fine young man, Mr. Dana. They do say he's making up to Sarah Gilson, the lawyer's daughter. Good match, too." "Good afternoon," said both the ladies in a breath. "Glad to see you, Mr. Dana. Folks well? That's right. We have been saying that you could tell us who Floy, the author of that charming book, Life Sketches, really is." "You are inclined to quiz me," said Mr. Dana. "I think it should be you who should give me that information." "Us!" exclaimed both the old ladies. "Us! We have not the slightest idea who she is. We only admire her book." "Well, then, I have an unexpected pleasure to bestow," said Mr. Dana, rubbing his hands in great glee. "Allow me to inform you, Mrs. Hall, that Floy is no more, no less, than your daughter-in-law, Ruth." "Impossible!" screamed the old lady, growing very red in the face, and clearing her throat most vigorously. "I assure you it is true. My informant is quite reliable. I am glad you admire your daughter-in-law's book, Mrs. Hall. I quite share the feeling with you." "But I don't admire it," said the old lady, growing every moment more confused. "There are several things in it, now I think of them, which I consider highly immoral. I think I mentioned them to you, Mrs. Spear," said she, trusting to that lady's defective memory, "at the time I lent it to you." "Oh, no, you didn't," replied Mrs. Spear. "You said it was one of the best and most interesting books you have ever read, else I should not have borrowed it. I am very particular what I put in my children's way." "Well, I couldn't have been thinking of what I was saying," said the old lady. "The book is very silly, a great part of it, beside being very bold for a woman, and as I said before, really immoral." "It is highly recommended by the religious press," said Mr. Dana, infinitely amused at the old lady's sudden change of opinion. "You can't tell," said the old lady. "I have no doubt she wrote these notices herself." "She has made an ample fortune at any rate," said the young man, "more than I ever expect to make, if I should scribble till doomsday." "Don't believe it," said the old lady, fidgeting in her chair, "or if she has, it won't last long." "In that case she has only to write another book," said the persistent Mr. Dana. "Her books will always find a ready market." "We shall see," said the old lady, bridling. "It is my opinion she'll go out like the wick of a candle. People won't read a second edition of such trash. Ruth Hall, Floy, humph! That accounts, humph! Well, anyhow, if she has made money, she had her nose held to the grindstone pretty well first. That's one comfort. She, Floy, humph! That accounts. Well, sometimes money is given for a curse. I've hearn tell of such things." "Yes, yes, I've hearn tell of such things," muttered the old lady, patting her foot as her two visitors left. "Dreadful grand, Ruth Floy feels now, I suppose. A sight of money she's made, has she? A great deal she knows how to invest it. Invest it! What's the use of talking about that? It will be invested on her back in silk gowns, laces, frumpery, and such things. I haven't a silk gown in the world. The least she could do would be to send me one for the care of that child. Yes, laces and feathers, feathers and laces. The children, too, all tricked out like little monkeys, with long ostrich legs and short bob-tailed skirts standing out like the Opry girls, and whole yards of ribbon streaming from their hair, I'll warrant. The catechise clean driven out of Katie's head. Shouldn't be at all astonished if they went to dancing school or any other immoral place. Wonder where they'll live. In some grand hotel, of course. Dinner at 6 o'clock, black servants, gold salt cellars, and finger glasses. Nothing short of that'll suit now. Humph! Shouldn't be astonished any day to hear Ruth kept a carriage and servants in livery, or had been to Victory's Court in lappets and diamonds. She's just impudent enough to do it. She isn't afraid of anybody nor anything. Dare say she will marry some count or duke. She has no more principle. Humph! I suppose she is crowing well over me. Very well. The wheel may turn round again, who knows? In fact, I am sure of it. How glad I should be! Well, I must say I didn't think she had so much perseverance. I expected she'd just sit down after a while and fret herself to death, and be well out of the way. Floy! Humph! I suppose I shan't take up a newspaper now without getting a dose about her. I dare say that spiteful young Dana will call here again just to rile me up by praising her. What a fool I was to get taken in so about that book. But how should I know it was hers? I should as soon have thought of her turning out Mrs. Buonaparty as an authoress. Authoress! Humph! Wonder how the heels of her stockings look. S'pose she wears silk ones now, and French shoes. She was always as proud as Lucifer of her foot. Well, I must say, as long as there's nobody here to hear me, that she beats all. Humph! She'll collapse, though. There's no doubt of that. I've heard of balloons that alighted in mud puddles. End of chapter 86. Chapter 87. "Good morning, Mr. Elliott," said Mr. Jones, making an attempt at a bow, which the stiffness of his shirt collar rendered entirely abortive. "How'd you do?" "Oh, how are you, Mr. Jones? I was just looking over the household messenger here, reading my daughter Floy's pieces, and thinking what a great thing it is for a child to have a good father. Floy was carefully brought up and instructed, and this, you see, is the result. I have been reading several of her pieces to a clergyman who was in here just now. I keep them on hand in my pocket book, to exhibit as a proof of what early parental education and guidance may do in developing latent talent and giving the mind a right direction." "I was not aware Floy was your daughter," replied Mr. Jones. "Do you know what time she commenced writing? What was the title of her first article, and what was her remuneration?" "Sir?" said Mr. Elliott, wishing to gain a little time, and looking very confused. "Perhaps I should not ask such questions," said the innocent Mr. Jones, mistaking the cause of Mr. Elliott's hesitation. "But I felt a little curiosity to know something of her early progress. What a strong desire you must have felt for her ultimate success, and how much your influence and sympathy must have assisted her. Do you know whether her remuneration at the commencement of her career as a writer was above the ordinary average of pay?" "Yes. No. Really, Mr. Jones, I will not venture to say, lest I should make a mistake. My memory is apt to be so treacherous." "She wrote merely for amusement, I suppose. There could be no necessity in your daughter's case," said the blundering Mr. Jones. "Certainly not," replied Mr. Elliott. "It is astonishing how she can write so feelingly about the poor," said Mr. Jones. "It is so seldom that an author succeeds in depicting truthfully those scenes for which he draws solely upon the imagination." "My daughter Floy has a very vivid imagination," replied Mr. Elliott nervously. "Women generally have, I believe. They are said to excel our sex in word painting." "I don't know but it may be so," said Jones. "Floy certainly possesses it in an uncommon degree. It is difficult else to imagine, as I said before, how a person who has always been surrounded with comfort and luxury could describe so feelingly the other side of the picture. It is remarkable. Do you know how much she has realized by her writings?" "There again," said the disturbed Mr. Elliott, "my memory is at fault. I am not good at statistics." "Some thousands, I suppose," replied Mr. Jones. "Well, how true it is, that 'to him who hath shall be given.' Now here is your literary daughter, who has no need of money, realizes a fortune by her books, while many a destitute and talented writer starves on a crust." "Yes," replied Mr. Elliott, "the ways of Providence are inscrutable." End of chapter 87. Chapter 88. "Female literature seems to be all the rage now," remarked a gentleman who was turning over the volumes in Mr. Devlin's bookstore, No. 6 Literary Row. "Who are your most successful lady authors?" "Miss Pine," said Mr. Devlin, "authoress of Shadows; Miss Taft, authoress of Sunbeams; and Miss Bittman, authoress of Fairyland." "I have been told," said the gentleman, "that Life Sketches by Floy has had an immense sale, a larger one in fact than any of the others. Is that so?" "It has had a tolerable sale," answered Mr. Devlin coldly. "I might have published it, I suppose, had I applied, but I had a very indifferent opinion of the literary talent of the authoress. The little popularity it has had is undoubtedly owing to the writer being a sister of Hyacinth Elliott, the editor of the Irving magazine." "But is she his sister?" said the gentleman. "There are many rumors afloat. One hardly knows what to believe." "No doubt of it," said Mr. Devlin. "In fact, I myself know it to be true. Floy is his sister, and it is altogether owing to the transferring of her articles by him to the columns of his paper, and his liberal endorsement of them, that she has had any success." "Indeed," said the gentleman. "Why, I was a subscriber for both the Standard when her first article appeared in it, and also for the Irving magazine, and I am very sure that nothing of hers was copied in the latter until she had acquired an enviable popularity over all the Union. No, sir," said Mr. Walter, for it was he, "I know a great deal more about Floy and her writings than you can tell me, and some little about yourself. I have often heard of the version you give of this matter, and I came in to satisfy myself if it had been correctly reported to me. Now, allow me to set you right, sir," said he, with a stern look. "The editor of the Irving magazine never recognized Floy as his sister, till the universal popular voice had pronounced its verdict in her favor. Then, when the steam was up, and the locomotive whizzing past, he jumps on, and says, 'How fast we go!'" "I think you are mistaken, sir," replied Mr. Devlin, with a faint attempt to retain his position. "I am not mistaken, sir. I know personally that in the commencement of her literary career, when one or two articles of hers were copied into his paper by an assistant in the office, he positively forbade her nom de plume being again mentioned, or another of her articles copied into the Irving magazine. He is a miserable time server, sir. Fashion is his god. He recognizes only the drawing room side of human nature. Sorrow in satin he can sympathize with, but sorrow in rags is too plebeian for his exquisite organization. Good morning, Mr. Devlin. Good morning, sir. The next time I heard of your giving a version of this matter, I trust it will be a correct one," added he, with a stern look. "Well," exclaimed Mr. Walter, as he walked down the street, "of all mean meanness of which a man can be guilty, the meanest in my estimation is to rob a woman of her justly earned literary fame, and I wish, for the credit of human nature, it were confined to persons of as limited mental endowments and influence as the one I have just left." Chapter 88. Chapters 89 and 90 of Ruth Hall by Fanny FERN. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 89. "Oh, how frightened I was!" exclaimed Nettie, as her mother applied some healing salve to a slight burn on her arm. "How frightened I was at that fire!" "You mean how frightened you were after the fire," replied her mother, smiling. "You were so bewildered, waking up out of that sound sleep, that I fancy you did not understand much about the danger till after good Johnny Galt saved you." "If I did not love Nettie so much, I should certainly give Johnny Galt my picture," said Nettie, with a sudden burst of enthusiasm. "I will see that Johnny Galt is rewarded," replied Ruth. "But this is the day Mr. Walter was to have come. I hope Johnny Galt will meet him at the depot as he promised, else he will be so alarmed about our safety when he learns of the fire. Dear me, how the rain comes down. It looks as though it meant to persevere." "Yes, and persevere too," said Nettie, with an arch look at her mother. Katie and Ruth had not finished laughing at this sally when Mr. Walter was announced. His greeting was grave, for he trembled to think of the danger they had escaped. After mutual congratulations had been exchanged, a detailed account of their escape given, and Johnny Galt's heroism duly extolled, Mr. Walter said, "Well, I am glad to find you so comfortably housed after the fire, but the sooner I take all of you under my charge the better, I think. What do you say to starting for a new place to-morrow? Are you sufficiently recovered from your fright and fatigue?" "Oh, yes," replied Ruth, laughing. "Do we not look as good as new? Our wardrobe, to be sure, is in rather a slender condition, but that is much easier remedied than a slender purse, as I have good reason to know." "Very well, then," said Mr. Walter. "It is understood that we go to morrow. I have some business to look after in the morning. Shall you object to wait till after dinner?" "Not at all," replied Ruth. "In my opinion nothing can equal the forlornness of forsaking a warm bed, to start breakfastless on a journey with one's eyes half open." "Floy," said Mr. Walter, taking a package from his pocket, "I have obeyed your directions, and here is something which you may well be proud of," and he handed Ruth a paper. It ran thus: "Stock certificate with shares worth $100 each, the Seton Bank. Be it known that Mrs. Ruth Hall is entitled to 100 shares of the capital stock of the Seton Bank, and holds the same subject to the conditions and stipulations contained in the articles of association of such institution, which shares are transferable on the books of association by the said Mrs. Ruth Hall or her attorney, on surrender of this certificate, in witness whereof, etc., etc." "There," said Mr. Walter, laughing, "imagine yourself, if you can, in that dismal attic 1 year ago, a bank stock holder. Now confess that you are proud of yourself." "We are proud of her," said the talkative Nettie, "if she is not proud of herself. Don't you think it is too bad, Mr. Walter, that mamma won't let Katie and me tell that Floy is our mother? A little girl who lived at the hotel that was burned up said to Katie that her uncle had just given her life sketches for a birthday present, and told her that she must try and write as well as Floy one of these days, and Katie looked at me, and I looked at Katie, and oh, isn't it just too bad, Mr. Walter, that mamma won't let us tell, when we want to so much?" "Well," said Mr. Walter, laughing, "I have only one little remark to make about that, namely, I have no doubt you two young ladies discovered some time before I did, that when your mamma says no, there is an end to all argument." End of chapter 89. Chapter 90. The morning of the next day was bright and fair. After dinner our traveling party entered the carriage in waiting, and proceeded on their way, the children chattering as usual, like little magpies, and Ruth and Mr. Walter occupied with their own solitary reflections. One of the greatest luxuries of true friendship is the perfect freedom one feels, irrespective of the presence of another, to indulge in the mood of the moment, whether that mood be grave or gay, taciturn or loquacious, the unspeakable deliciousness of being reprieved from talking at a mark, hampered by no fear of uncivility or discourtesy. Ruth had found this a great charm in the society of Mr. Walter, who seemed perfectly to understand and sympathize with her varied moods. On the present occasion she particularly felt its value, oppressed as she was by the rush of thoughts, retrospective and anticipatory, standing as it were on the threshold of a new epoch in her changing existence. "Where are we going, mother?" asked Katie, as the carriage passed through a stone gateway, and down a dim avenue of ancient trees. "To dear papa's grave," replied Ruth, "before we leave this part of the country." "Yes," murmured Katie, in a low whisper. It was very beautiful, that old avenue of pine trees, through which the setting sun was struggling faintly now, resting like a halo on some moss-grown gravestone, now gilding some more ambitious monument of Mammon's raising. The winding cemetery paths, thronged by day with careless feet, were silent now. No lightsome laughter echoed through those leafy dells, grating upon the ear which almost listened for the loved voice. No strange eye, with curious gaze, followed the thoughtful group, speculating upon her heart's hidden history, but, now and then, a little loitering bird, tempted beyond its mate to lengthen its evening flight, flitted, with a brief gush of song, across their pathway. Hushed, holy, and unprofaned was this Sabbath of the dead. Aching hearts were throbbed with pain no longer, weary feet were still, busy hands lay idly crossed over tired breasts. Babes who had poised one tiny foot on life's turbid ocean brink, then shrank back affrighted at the surging waves, here slept their peaceful sleep. The moon had silvered the old chapel turrets, and the little nodding flowers glistened with dewdrops, but still Ruth lingered. Old memories were thronging thick and fast upon her, past joys, past sorrows, past sufferings, and yet the heart, which felt them all so keenly, would soon lie pulseless amid these mouldering thousands. There was a vacant place left by the side of Harry. Ruth's eye rested on it, then on her children, then on Mr. Walter. "So help me God," reverently murmured the latter, interpreting the mute appeal. As the carriage rolled from under the old stone gateway, a little bird, startled from out its leafy nest, trilled forth a song as sweet and clear as the larks at heaven's own blessed gate. "Accept the omen, dear Ruth," said Mr. Walter. "Life has much of harmony yet in store for you." End of chapter 90, and the end of the book Ruth Hall by Fanny Fern.